Welcome back to the File X channel. 1122 King Road, Moscow, Idaho, USA. The three-story house sits peacefully on a hillside in what could be described as a typical college town, with many apartments around it designated for students. November 13th, 2022, 11 a.m. Dylan Mortensen woke up late on that Sunday, as one might expect. She walked down from her bedroom on the second floor to the first floor, sipping coffee while looking out the window. It had been sunny the previous day, but today the sky was cloudy and quite cold. Dylan was scrolling through TikTok, looking for any interesting videos. When she glanced at the clock, it was nearly lunchtime. She wanted to wait a little longer to discuss lunch plans with her housemates. However, since everyone had stayed up late the previous night, no one seemed to have woken up yet. After a while, thinking it was time to wake her friends, she went back upstairs to knock on the door of the room next to hers. However, contrary to her expectations, the scene inside was horrifying. With a trembling voice, Dylan called the Moscow Police Department at 11:58 a.m. The police arrived at the address after receiving a report that an unconscious person had been found inside the house. Moscow is a rural town centered around the University of Idaho, a place with no significant crime history. The police initially assumed it was simply a case of a student who had drunk too much on a Saturday night. When they arrived at the three-story house on King Road and checked the reported room, they found, apart from Dylan, another girl named Bethany, crying and trembling in fear. Following the directions of the two girls, the police went upstairs to the second floor and opened a room where they were shocked to find a body lying on the bed and another on the floor. The officers then proceeded to the third floor. Upon opening another door, they discovered two more girls dead on the bed. At this moment, the police realized the gravity of the situation and immediately contacted headquarters, reporting that this was not a simple incident, but a murder case. Police cars quickly gathered outside the house, cordoning off the area and starting the investigation. In the initial interviews, Dylan and Bethany stated that 6 students in total had been sleeping in the house on the night of the incident. The 2 surviving female students claimed they were not attacked in any way. In fact, Bethany, who had slept in her room on the first floor, was entirely unaware of what had happened until she heard Dylan's screams. Thus, there were 4 victims and 2 survivors. Why did the perpetrator kill 4 people, but spare the other 2? Upon inspecting the house, the police found the answer to this question. Specifically, there were no signs of burglary anywhere in the house. The house had 2 entrances, the main door on the first floor and a sliding door on the second floor. This type of sliding door is often installed in homes with external staircases for easier access to the second floor. Based on the recorded scene, it is highly likely the perpetrator entered through the sliding door on the second floor, a less noticeable entrance compared to the main door on the first floor. All these details suggested that the perpetrator was familiar with the structure of the house. He entered, went straight to his targets, and killed the victims. The entire United States was shocked by the news of a murder case that occurred in the vicinity of a university campus. The university canceled all classes the day after the murders, and some professors canceled their sessions for the entire week. Students were terrified and refused to go outside, while parents urged their children to return home until the perpetrator was caught. People stayed indoors before sunset and locked their doors when going out for walks at night. They were forced to travel in small groups, as no one dared to go out alone. With public fear escalating, the investigation was no longer solely conducted by the Moscow Police Department. The Idaho State Police also stepped in to take over the case, November 17, 2022. 4 days after the incident, the autopsy results were revealed. First, the cause of death for all 4 victims was stabbing with a sharp object. Each person had multiple stab wounds, and there were no signs of defensive wounds. However, the Forensic Institute suggested that the 4 victims might have been attacked while they were sleeping. Second, when the police arrived at the scene, they found a mysterious sheath for a sharp object to the right of one of the female victims on the 3rd floor. It was a military-grade sharp object with a leather sheath bearing the emblem of the Marine Corps. The perpetrator appeared to have entered the house with a clear plan to kill. The police successfully extracted male DNA from the knife sheath. A quick comparison was made against the criminal DNA database, but no matches were found. Third, there were no signs of sexual assault. Finally, the identities of the 4 victims were officially determined in detail. First, the 2 bodies found on the 2nd floor belonged to a young woman named Zana and a young man of the same age named Ethan. Zana Kernots, 20 years old. Zana was born and raised in Idaho, living in a 2nd-floor room of the house. She had been an athlete since childhood and participated in volleyball and track and field until she graduated high school. In 2022, at the time of her murder, Zana was majoring in marketing at the University of Idaho and was actively involved in various club activities. Her friends described Zana as a ray of sunshine, always wearing a bright smile on her face. Ethan Chapin, 20 years old. Ethan was Zana's boyfriend. Born in Washington State, he was one of 3 triplets in his family. Ethan was considered the easiest of the siblings to raise, often waiting patiently for his turn. Ethan met Zana at the University of Idaho, where he was majoring in tourism and recreation management. Friends often saw Ethan by Zana's side, and the 2 got along so well that no one ever saw them argue. Ethan had a calm and quiet demeanor, always maintaining his composure. On the 3rd floor, 2 female bodies were found named Maddie and Kaylee. Maddie Morgan, 21 years old. Maddie lived in a 3rd-floor room of the house. She was a marketing major at the University of Idaho and an ordinary college student. However, what made Maddie stand out among her peers was her frequent posting of videos on TikTok. Kaylee Goncalves, 21 years old. Kaylee was Maddie's best friend. The 2 had been close since the 6th grade. With similar hairstyles and makeup, many mistook them for sisters. At the time of her death, Kaylee was about to graduate from college in 1 month and planned to become an elementary school teacher. On the day of the incident, she stopped by to show her best friend, Maddie, her new car. During the investigation, the police uncovered a critical detail. Only Zana and Maddie were residents of the house where the murders occurred. Ethan and Kaylee did not live there. In this case, the police speculated that the perpetrator likely harbored a grudge against Zana and Maddie, targeting them specifically. However, upon encountering Ethan and Kaylee during the attack, the killer decided to eliminate them as well. So, who could have held such a deep grudge against Zana and Maddie that they would mercilessly take 4 lives in a single night? The strangers in the house at 1122. There is a fact that the house where the murders occurred was known as a frequent party spot. The noise levels often got so loud that it disturbed the neighbors. In fact, in September 2022, just 2 months before the incident, Moscow City Police received a complaint from neighbors about Zana and Maddie's house being too noisy, preventing them from sleeping. When the police knocked on the door, a surprising detail emerged. Among the many students partying inside the house, not one of them was a resident. In other words, only the friends of the 6 tenants renting the house were gathered there, drinking and having fun in an empty home, a somewhat unusual situation. Now, with the murders having taken place, this raised a troubling question about the people present that night. Could one of them have been the killer? This suspicion was soon dismissed. In the body cam footage recorded by the police that night, the situation became clearer. In the later part of the video, after contacting the phone numbers provided by the people in the house, Maddie herself answered the police's call and promised to remind her college friends to turn the music down. Additionally, the police contacted those individuals and confirmed that all of them were in their dormitories at the time of the murders. They all had solid alibis. Once again, the question remained unanswered. Who bore a grudge against Zana and Maddie, or perhaps just one of them, leading to this horrific crime? The police began investigating the movements of both Zana and Maddie by reviewing surveillance footage across the Moscow area and analyzing the cell phone records of all 4 victims, starting from one day before the incident occurred. Saturday night, November 12, 2022. The young man in the hoodie at the food truck. Saturday, 8:57 p.m. Kaylee posted a picture on TikTok. In the photo, the 4 victims appeared to have spent time together that day. 9 p.m. Ethan and Zana visited the Sigma Chi fraternity house on the University of Idaho campus and stayed there until 1:30 a.m. the following morning. At the same time, Kaylee and Maddie went out with housemates. 10 p.m. Kaylee and Maddie arrived at a local club called the Corner Club at 202 Main Street in downtown Moscow. 1 a.m. According to surveillance footage, Kaylee and Maddie were seen at a local food truck at 318 Main Street. While waiting for their pasta orders, they smiled and looked at their phones as usual. However, a concerning incident occurred when Maddie seemed to have an argument with a young man in a hoodie standing behind them. She even pointed her finger directly at his face. When this information came to light, it sparked speculation about whether the argument at the food truck could have led to the murder of the 4 Idaho students. This wasn't an entirely baseless theory. Police immediately sought out and investigated the young man in the hoodie. However, they soon dropped the inquiry as the man had a solid alibi. Sunday, 1:45 a.m. to 4:12 a.m. Ethan and Zana were reported to have returned to the house at 1122 King Road. Based on phone records during this time, Ethan and Zana were watching YouTube and browsing TikTok as usual. Zana was confirmed to have ordered food via her phone. The food was delivered at 4 a.m., and Zana's last activity on TikTok was recorded at 4:12 a.m. This confirmed that Zana was alive at least until 4:12 a.m. Meanwhile, Maddie and Kaylee took a ride home. With this information in hand, police promptly investigated the drivers who transported the 4 students home, as well as the food delivery personnel that night. Yet, all leads were inconclusive. Police lacked any evidence to charge anyone as a suspect. It seemed like there was no clear path to uncovering the truth. Finally, the 2 housemates who survived that night were interviewed as witnesses at the police station. Key testimony unveils the killer. Since Ethan and Zana were murdered in a room on the 2nd floor, Dylan, who survived and was the first to discover the incident, was also sleeping on the 2nd floor, albeit in a different room. Therefore, Dylan's testimony is critically important. According to Dylan's account, Around 4 a.m. on the day of the incident, she was sleeping when she was suddenly startled awake by a loud noise. Initially, Dylan thought it was Kaylee playing with her dog, so she closed her eyes and tried to go back to sleep. However, just as she closed her eyes, she heard Kaylee's voice saying, "Someone is here." Dylan quietly opened her door to look outside and see if anyone was in the hallway, but after looking around, she saw no one. She returned to her bed, but soon heard sobbing. She couldn't identify whose voice it was, but then also heard a man's voice saying, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." Dylan got up again, quietly opened her door, and looked outside, but still saw no one. She returned to her bed, but continued to feel uneasy. She decided to open the door a third time, this time only cracking it slightly without stepping out, as she had done before. At that moment, Dylan saw a man dressed in black, leaving Zana's room and walking in her direction. He was wearing black clothes and a black ski mask. Although Dylan could not see his face due to the mask, she distinctly remembered his prominent, thick eyebrows and well-built physique, estimating his height to be at least 5'10" inches, 1.78 m, or taller. At that moment, Dylan was so shocked that she froze in place. The man walked past her toward the sliding glass door, and Dylan heard the sound of the door opening and closing. At this point, police recalled finding a footprint when they sprayed chemicals in the house, one invisible to the naked eye. It matched the sole pattern of a men's shoe with a diamond-shaped tread, a design often used by the Vans brand. This supported Dylan's testimony that the suspect might be male. Dylan, still in shock, locked her door, got back into bed, and hid under her blanket. She was unsure if the man had seen her. During that time, she didn't hear any sounds resembling screams from her friends, so she couldn't gauge how serious the situation was. Overwhelmed with fear, she fell asleep at some point. The autopsy report for Kaylee, combined with Dylan's testimony and further evidence revealed through surveillance cameras 50 feet, 15 m from the second floor, recorded an unusual noise at 4:17 a.m. After a groaning sound, there was a loud, unidentified noise, followed by the sound of barking, believed to be Kaylee's dog. Police concluded that the time of the murders was between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. The killer likely entered the house, committed the murders quickly, and fled. To identify the perpetrator, police tried to deduce who the initial target might have been. Firstly, because Dylan reported that the killer left the house through the second-floor sliding door, it seemed that the suspect might have killed Kaylee and Maddie on the third floor first, before heading down to the second floor and entering the room where Zana and Ethan were. Additionally, the discovery of the sheath of a sharp object next to Maddie's body on the third floor further supported the theory that the weapon was drawn and used there first. Finally, the stab wounds on Kaylee's body showed signs of being more brutal than those on the other victims. Could it be that Kaylee was the killer's primary target? It didn't seem likely that the killer would specifically target her, break into the house, and then attack Kaylee's nearby friends. However, no possibility could be ruled out. Could Kaylee's family have been the intended target instead? Police immediately visited Kaylee's family to gather more information. There, Kaylee's father revealed that she had told her family and friends multiple times that she felt someone was stalking her. Upon receiving this statement, it seemed police had found a crucial lead in identifying the killer. Unfortunately, when they checked surveillance footage from around the food truck where Maddie and Kaylee were last seen, and even after summoning all the men who had been seen staring at Maddie and Kaylee at the food truck to the police station, all suspects were found to have solid alibis and were eventually released. During the investigation, when the process seemed to be at an impasse, some police officers didn't give up and reviewed all the security cameras around the house. Their persistence paid off when they discovered a suspicious white car that appeared near 1122 King Road on the night of the murders. Starting at 3:29 a.m., shortly before the crime occurred, the car circled the neighborhood in a suspicious manner. At 4 a.m., after passing by the house 4 times, it stopped briefly in front of 1122 King Road before moving again. The car drove into a cul-de-sac and then returned, passing the house once more. This time, instead of continuing straight, it turned right, circling the house and disappearing from the cameras for a while. 16 minutes later, at 4:20 a.m., it sped away quickly and vanished. The police suspected that during those 16 minutes, the owner of the white car parked near the sliding door of the house, using the second-floor entrance to enter the residence and commit the murders. With this lead, they decided to track down the owner of the car. However, the white car had no front license plate, making it difficult to identify the owner or the specific model. After an intense investigation, they identified the vehicle as a white Hyundai Elantra, manufactured between 2011 and 2016. The police expanded their search radius and checked surveillance footage in other areas to track the car's movements. They found that at 3 a.m. on the day of the crime, a similar vehicle was seen in Pullman, Washington, located about 15 minutes away from the victim's home. Pullman is a town with a large population of Washington State University students. Despite the University of Idaho and Washington State University being in different states, they are only about 15 kilometers apart, a 10-minute drive. The police concentrated their search around the Washington State University area and, after 2 weeks, found the vehicle. Specifically, Washington State Police informed Idaho Police that they had located the vehicle at Washington State University. The car was registered under the name of Brian Kohberger, a 28-year-old man. He was described as tall, muscular, and matching the witness's description, including his prominent bushy eyebrows. Brian, a 28-year-old PhD student in criminology at Washington State University, held undergraduate and master's degrees in psychology and criminology. He was also teaching criminology courses at the university. Surprisingly, during the investigation, the police discovered a survey Brian had conducted online as part of his master's thesis preparation. The survey contained bizarre questions such as, if you were to commit a crime, would you plan and execute it at home? If so, please explain your thoughts and feelings during the preparation. Another question asked, if you were to commit a crime, how would you choose your target? Brian also frequently discussed crimes within a 15-kilometer radius during his lectures. However, after the murders, this topic was never brought up again. Brian was born in Pennsylvania, the son of a mechanic father and a school employee mother. He had 2 highly accomplished sisters. As a child, Brian struggled with his weight, which made him a target for bullying at school. Determined to change, he lost 43 kilograms. According to his family, Brian's personality shifted during this period. He began bullying weaker children himself. The police examined Brian's connections to the victims, but found no evidence of any direct relationship. Brian had moved from Pennsylvania to Washington State 6 months earlier to pursue his PhD in criminology. Moreover, analysis of Brian's cell phone activity on the day of the crime revealed that he had turned his phone off or switched it to airplane mode from 2:27 a.m. to 4:48 a.m. This prevented the police from tracking his location during the time of the murders. However, Brian's movements on the night of the crime raised suspicion. Although it would typically take 10 minutes to drive from his home to the crime scene, Brian was on the road for an hour. When his phone was turned back on at 4:48 a.m., It was located on Interstate 95, south of the crime scene. 5 days after the murders, Brian changed his car's license plate from Pennsylvania registration to a Washington plate, possibly to evade detection. Although this behavior made him a prime suspect, it wasn't enough to charge him with the murders. Adding to the mystery, at 9:12 a.m., just 4 hours after the murders, Brian's phone was detected near the crime scene again for about 10 minutes. Why would Brian return to the crime scene just 4 hours after committing the murders? Was it to retrieve something he left behind? On December 15, 2022, 32 days after the murders, Brian was stopped twice by Indiana State Police for following another car too closely. Body cam footage showed that he was not alone. His father was with him. The trip appeared to have been pre-planned, as Brian's father had flown from Pennsylvania to Washington State to accompany him on a road trip back to their home in Pennsylvania, approximately 2,500 miles from the crime scene. Despite being pulled over twice, Brian and his father were let go with verbal warnings. 2 days later, they arrived home in Pennsylvania. The police suspected Brian might have left DNA evidence at the crime scene. However, as a PhD student in criminology, Brian would likely be meticulous enough to avoid leaving such evidence. How could the police link him to the murders? For 4 days, the police staked out Brian's family home in Pennsylvania. They observed Brian wearing blue gloves and thoroughly cleaning his car, even at night. Eventually, Brian disposed of trash from the car, which the police promptly collected. While they didn't find Brian's DNA, they obtained his father's DNA. Laboratory analysis revealed that this DNA was a familial match to the DNA found at the crime scene. With this evidence, Brian was officially identified as the suspect. On December 30th, 2022, 47 days after the murders, at 3 a.m., police raided Brian's home with a team of 50 officers. Brian was arrested in his sleep, and the news spread quickly. While many were relieved that the suspect was apprehended, questions about his motive remained unanswered. In court, prosecutors presented key pieces of evidence. 1. The DNA found at the crime scene was a familial match to Brian's father's DNA. 2. Black clothing and gloves seized from Brian's home contained dog hair that matched Kaylee's dog. 3. Surveillance footage recorded Brian's car movements on the night of the crime. 4. Between June and November, Brian had visited the area around the victim's home 12 times. One unresolved issue prevented the case from being closed: the motive. Investigators explored whether Brian was an online acquaintance of any of the victims, if he had ever sent them messages, or if he had met them during daily activities. They also considered whether Brian had encountered Zana at her part-time job or attended parties at the victim's house, known for hosting frequent gatherings. On June 26, 2023, during another court hearing, prosecutors announced their intention to seek the death penalty for 4 counts of first-degree murder. The trial, which has attracted significant public attention, is being conducted in secrecy. One prosecutor cited Kaylee's claim to her family and friends that someone was stalking her, raising the question of whether Brian was her stalker. Others suggested that the murders were an experiment for Brian, based on his criminology studies. However, Brian's lawyer maintained his innocence, asserting that he had no special connection to the victims. To this day, the case remains under trial. While Brian has not been convicted, the evidence has made him a source of fear and speculation, particularly among students in Idaho. Many are left wondering when the case will finally be resolved. Ultimately, after a tragic story, the students and residents living nearby felt terrified every time they saw this house. Despite the objections from the victims' families, the Idaho State Police and the house's owner decided to demolish the crime scene. The police confirmed that no additional evidence was found in the house, and there was no need to preserve it, as they believed it was clear that Brian was the murderer. What are your thoughts on this case? Let us know in the comments below. See you in the next video.